So we are in Pirkei Avos, Perek Beis, Mishna Hey. Hillel Omer, Hillel says, Al tifrosh min hatzibor. Don't separate yourself from Klal Yisrael, from the tzibor. V'al tamen ba'atzmacha liyom moscha, and don't believe in yourself until the day that you die. V'al tognas chaverecha asher tagil l'makomo. Don't judge your friend till you reach his place. V'al tomer, don't say davar sheyev shalishmoa shesofer liyishama. Don't say something which is not, it shouldn't be heard, because at the end it'll end up being heard. V'al tomar l'kashe'efna eshna. When I have time, I'll go learn. Shema lo sipana. Maybe you won't have time later. You never know. Each one of these statements, 5 of them, are a Mishnah in and of itself. So I want to concentrate on just a couple of them today, and the rest of it we'll see next time we learn. So the first thing that Hillel says is, Al tifrosh min hatzibur. Don't separate yourself from the tzibur. This is one of the most important principles of Klal Yisrael. We swim or we sink together. And in Parshas Nitzavim, the Torah tells us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu Hashem put all of us into a covenant, a bris, which tells us that each person is actually responsible for every other person. Every Jew is responsible for all other Jews. We're not just responsible in a physical sense, but more importantly, responsible in a spiritual sense. So when somebody does a mitzvah, it's very good, because it goes into his mitzvah bank, so to speak, his personal mitzvah bank, but it also goes into the mitzvah bank of all of Klal Yisrael. So Hashem judges us as a unit, as well as judging us for each individual. And that's the understanding why there's a mitzvah in the Torah of hocheach tochiach zamisecha. One has to rebuke his friend for doing something which is not right. Rebuke, of course, does not mean you scream and yell at a person. Rebuke means you show a person the right way to do things, either by studying Torah with him or being a role model in order for him to change his or her actions. And the greatest example of that, of course, was what's brought in Chazal. There's millions of examples, but one that comes to mind is Aaron HaKohen. We talked about him when we did the Mishna in first Perek, the Midos of Aaron. It's worthwhile repeating here that Aaron had an unusual characteristic. When he would see a person doing something wrong, instead of moving away from that person, he would actually befriend that individual. And the person would see that the great Aaron HaKohen was his friend, and he wouldn't want to do anything wrong, because he'd say, like, what if my good friend Aaron would find out? It would be embarrassing for me. So he would step away. I had an aunt. Her name was Dora. That was her name. My Tante Dora. And she came to America early, but she couldn't get married. And eventually she married my great uncle Harry, who I don't remember. He died, I'm not sure, before I was born. And I don't remember him, but I've seen pictures of him, and I'm told a story about him, among other stories. Harry was a tailor. He wasn't a rich man, and he was not Shomer Shabbos. He didn't keep Shabbos. And he married my aunt, who did keep Shabbos. Unfortunately, they never had children. And he was not Shomer Shabbos. She was, and they lived like that for a number of years. My grandmother, Aleha Shalom, married her sister, my grandmother, went back to Europe and married my grandfather. Was a tremendous Talmid Chacham. He was a student of the famous Mir Yeshiva in Europe, and she married him, and they came back to America, and he began to learn in Kollel, and then he became the Rav of a shul in Harlem. They lived in Harlem, called Anshe Panadol. That was the name. That shul later folded, and he became the Rav of a shul eventually in Borough Park, called B'nai Yisrael, I think it was called, on 15th Avenue and 42nd. Anyway, so my uncle Harry, when my grandmother married my grandfather, and they came back to America, he said in Yiddish, "Was Leiki geht chasnobim mit der Talmid Chacham, and ich bin a Mechal Shabbos," which means that my grandmother was called Leiki, Leah. They called her Leiki. She's marrying a Talmid Chacham, a Torah scholar. She's marrying a Rav, and I'm going to be not a Shomer Shabbos. So right then and there, right that moment, he completely switched, and he became totally Shomer Shabbos, completely Shomer Shabbos. And there's a funny story about him that years later, when he retired, so they used to go to this Jewish center for older people. Used to go to this Jewish center. I don't know. They had classes there, and they would do things. Anyway, one day Harry was walking home from shul on Shabbos, and a friend that he knew from the Jewish center, he walked past him, was outside on his stoop. You know, in New York, they used to have these outside stairs in private homes. They called it a stoop. So the guy was sitting on a stoop, and he was playing the radio on Shabbos. And he calls out to Harry in Yiddish. He says to him, Harry was walking the other side of the street. He says to him, Harry, a good Shabbos. And Uncle Harry looks at him, doesn't say anything. So he calls it again. Harry, ich wünsche dir on a good Shabbos. I wish you have a good Shabbos. And Uncle Harry looks at him, doesn't say anything. And he walks on. All right. The next day in the Jewish center, this man comes over to Harry and he says to him, of course in Yiddish, he says to him, Harry, I wish you a good Shabbos. You're walking in the street and you don't answer me. What kind of business is that? So Harry says, I heard you wish me a good Shabbos, and I was in a quandary. I didn't know what to do. I thought to myself, to wish you a good Shabbos while your radio was playing in the middle of the street, that I can't do. And to say to you, have a good Saturday, I wasn't prepared to do either. So I just walked on. So that was, Uncle Harry became a very strong Yid. So that's the, he became, that's the concept of rebuke without saying a word. He didn't, my grandfather influenced my grandmother influenced her brother-in-law to become a Shomer Shabbos, even though she didn't do a thing except get married. So, but Hillel says, Al tifrosh min hatzibur. Don't separate yourself from the tzibur. Now, and all of us as Jews rise and fall together. The Navi tells us a fascinating story, which I want to share with you. There was in Malachim Beis, the Navi tells us about Elisha. Elisha ben Shaphat was one of the great Nevi'im. He was the leader of his generation. He was a Talmud, a disciple of Eliyahu HaNavi. So Elisha HaNavi used to go around this area, and he had a yeshiva, and he would go to different sections of Eretz Yisrael on a steady basis. And this, he used to come by this area called Shunam, certain area. And this woman says to her husband, listen, the Navi comes to us, our area, on a steady basis. Let's build for him a little small aliyah, a little small area, a room, and he'll have there a table and a chair and a bed, and we'll provide him with food. Whenever he comes to the area, he'll stay by us. You have to recognize that it wasn't a small thing, because in those days, in that time, there was a lot of poverty in Eretz Yisrael, and they were suffering from poverty, but yet this is what she wanted to do. And her husband agreed. So whenever the Navi would come to their area, he would stay by them. He took them up on the offer. He would sleep in their room. He would eat their food, and that's where he would be. One day, the Navi tells us that Elisha calls them in and says to this woman, he says, what can I do for you? I want to repay you. What can I do for you? Yesh li l'daber alecha, can I speak to you la'melech, to the king, or la'chad min hasarim, or to one of the nobility? So, meaning I'm the Navi, and I'm politically connected, and have the ability to talk to the king or to one of the nobility for you. So she says, no, betoch ami anochi yosheves. I sit among my nation. So Elisha's Talmud says that, 1 minute, this woman doesn't have a child. They're older and they have no children.
One of the greatest statements, I believe, it's in my opinion, the greatest statements in the whole Nevi'im. Like they say, in Yosef, Ani Yosef. That's the greatest statement. This is the greatest statement in the Nevi'im. That's my opinion.
I'm glad you appreciate it, Nisim. I think it's a great statement also. Listen to what happens. So Gechazi, the Talmud of Elisha says to him, but this woman doesn't have a child, and they're older. So Elisha promises, he says, in a year's time, Ad Chavekes Bain, you'll be cuddling a child. Now, as Nisim says, the Gemara explains, terrific. The Gemara says that Osa Yom, that day, Yom Kippur Haya, was Yom Kippur. And the king that Elisha was referring to was not the worldly king at that time. He was referring to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He's saying that I am a prophet, and I have a direct line to Hashem through my tefillah. Is there anything that you need that I could daven to Hashem for you that will be fulfilled? And if you don't want to go to Hashem, you daven to Hashem directly. You don't want a direct bestowal from Hashem. So Hashem will do it through a malach, through an angel. So the woman says, and a very impressive statement, "B'toch ami anochi yosheves." I am among my nation, which means that I don't want to be taken out separately and judged. I want to be part of the Jewish people. And as the Jewish people go, I go. Now listen to this. This is a woman, and this is what Nisim is impressed about. This is a woman who has no children. She's older. And al pi derech hateva, according to natural understanding, the rules of nature, she's not going to have a child. A couple without children, especially a woman without children, is devastating for people not to have children. To what lengths will people go to just to have a child? And imagine this woman says, "B'toch ami anochi yosheves." I'm among my nation. I'm not going to be singled out. Until the Talmud of Elisha says this woman doesn't have a child, and Elisha davens and guarantees her a child. What is this understanding? Because this woman understood that she is part of Klal Yisrael. She sinks or she swims with Klal Yisrael. She's not a person who is independent. And the fact of the matter is that when we daven, it's exactly like that. When we daven Shemona Esrei, we don't say, you're the one who gives wisdom, right? Chaneni, give to me wisdom. No, we say chanenu me'itcha. We don't say hashiveni, bring me l'sorasecha to your Torah, right? We say hashivenu Hashem l'gech l'sorasecha, bring us to our Torah. We don't say salach li in Shemona Esrei. We don't say forgive me. We say salach lanu. We don't say shema koli, listen to my voice. Hashem, we say shema kolenu, listen to our voice. And the Vilna Gaon says that if a person were to daven Shemona Esrei in the singular, not in the plural, then he would not be Yotzei Tefillah B'tzibur, would not count as davening. He would have to re-daven, because davening is not just for myself, it's for all of us. That's the concept of a minyan. A minyan is a kahal, a kehila. It's an Eda, as the Gemara says. An Eda means that a minyan is a microcosm of all of Klal Yisrael. We can't daven Shacharit, Mincha, and Ma'ariv together as one nation. We can't have millions of Jews all together davening together. Shacharit wouldn't work out. So what we do is we have 10 people to daven together, and that is a cross section. That is a representation, is the word I'm looking for Klal Yisrael. That's what it is. So all of our tefillos and our entire life is a community life, and we have to be in it together, or we're not going to be able to survive. Ben Franklin had a great line that when they were discussing whether they were going to, the founding fathers of America were discussing whether they were going to rebel against King George III or not. So Ben Franklin was talking about the importance of unity, of all the founding fathers to be together and not to go off in their separate way. And he said a very pithy line. He said, if we don't hang together, we will surely hang separately. That's what Franklin said. Great line. And the truth is, nothing is better said than Klal Yisrael. We all have to be together. Otherwise, we're just a sheep among many wolves. And if we don't go together with all of Klal Yisrael, then the wolves will definitely pick us off. So that's the first part of this Mishnah. Hillel says, I'll tifrosh min hatzibor. I'll point out one more, just understanding manifestation of this Mishnah. We all know that Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, the Talmidim of Hillel and Shammai, disputed each other throughout Shas, throughout the Talmud. There are many instances of the discussions, disagreements in halacha between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. And yet the Gemara tells us in Yevamos that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel did not refrain from marrying each other. It wasn't an argument which was shalol l'shem shemayim, it was an argument l'shem shemayim. But when the halacha was decided, mostly like Beis Hillel, sometimes like Beis Shammai, so all the Talmidim of Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai agreed with it, and they all said, this is the halacha, there's one Torah. I disagree, but that's only until the halacha has been decided. Once it's been decided, this is what the din is, and this is what the halacha tells us, and this is what we have to do. Comes to mind the very famous case of Rabbi Yeshua. The Gemara tells us, it's a Mishna at the end of the second Perek of Sukkah. The Gemara tells us that, of Rosh Hashanah. I said Sukkah, Rosh Hashanah. Gemara tells us that Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Gamliel had a dispute about the acceptance of witnesses as far as if it's a new moon or not. As you know, that today it's all very easy. We look in the calendar and we see when Rosh Chodesh is, but in the time of Chazal, of our sages, and what's really supposed to be is that we're supposed to take a proper sitting Bezdin has to accept. The Bezdin Agadol takes two witnesses, accepts them, cross-examines them, and they accept their testimony as to the new moon. And when they're clear that these two witnesses saw the new moon, then they pronounce that Kodesh, they pronounce that the new moon has been sanctified, and we declare Rosh Chodesh. So there was an argument between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Gamliel as to whether the testimony of these two particular witnesses was valid or not. The two witnesses had said they saw the new moon on one night, and then the night following, they didn't see it. And Rav Doseb and Horkinus disagreed with, Rabbi Gamliel said, yes, it's we accept this testimony. It's possible, astrologically, such a thing can happen. Rav Doseb and Horkinus said, no, it's similar to saying that that a woman gave birth and the next day she's pregnant. It's not possible such a thing should happen. So, and Rabbi Yeshua agreed with Reb Dosem and Horkinus, and he said that I don't accept this, that I don't believe this, that the witnesses were correct, and therefore the new month has to be declared 1 day later. So according to Rabbi Gamliel, the month was on a particular day, and according to Rabbi Yeshua, it was a day later. Now that dispute happened on Rosh Hashanah. The question was when to declare Rosh Hashanah. The declaration of the month of Rosh Hashanah is portentous because 10 days later comes Yom Kippur. And according to Rabbi Gamliel, Yom Kippur was 1 day earlier than Rabbi Yeshua held Yom Kippur was. Now, Rabbi Gamliel and his Bezdin declared that this is Rosh Chodesh, and therefore Yom Kippur was 10 days later. Rabbi Yeshua didn't agree. Rabbi Gamliel sent a message to Rabbi Yeshua saying that I want you to come to me on the day in which you consider to be Yom Kippur, publicly come to me with your walking stick and with your money bag. I want you to come and present yourself to me. And after much deliberation, Rabbi Yeshua did that. He came to Rabbi Gamliel and he walked into Rabbi Gamliel's base medrash, and there he was with his walking stick. He carried on the day he held was Yom Kippur, and with his money bag. And Rabbi Yeshua understood that after much deliberation, that once the Bezdin paskind al tifrosh min hatzibur, we don't separate ourselves from the tzibur. Whatever the tzibur says, that's what we do. And there are many cases in the Gemara where you find that one of the Tanoim or another says that I will listen to whatever my friends say, no matter what. I never contradicted my friend, my chaverim, because al tifrosh min hatzibur. I don't go against what the majority says. what the Tzibur says. Now, the next part of the Mishnah is also a fascinating part of the Mishnah. It says, Al tamin ba'atzmacha ad yom moscha. Don't have confidence in yourself until the day that you die. That's what it says, meaning a person should never believe that he is, I'm never going to sin. It's not going to happen to me. Okay? Other people, to me, it'll never happen. Okay? I'll never sin. Yeah. Anyway, so let's understand what this means. The Gemara tells us that there was a the Gemara, it's Yerushalmi tells us there was once a great man, a chassid, a person who was a real tzaddik, and he said he translated not ad yom moscha, not until the day that you die, but ad yom ziknesecha, until you get older. Meaning, when you get older and your Yetzer Hara goes away from you, and you're not so interested in the pleasures of this world, then you could be confident if you haven't sinned until now, you're not going to sin any further. And he said, Ad Yom Ziknasecha could go on ani. Me, I'm an old man already, and I'm never going to sin. The Yetzer Hara is gone from me, and I'm never going to sin. So the Satan, Satan, appeared to him in the guise of a beautiful woman and seduced him. And this fellow, despite his age, and despite the fact that he thought that he had no Yetzer Hara, agreed to have relations with this beautiful woman. And then he repented. And the Satan said to him, don't be so upset with yourself. It was only me, the Satan. I didn't want you to consider yourself greater than anybody else. Our sages said that al taman atzmacha, don't believe in yourself until Yom Moscha, including the day that you die. Don't believe that you're not going to sin, and I wanted you to understand that, and that's why I put you to such a test. The Gemara tells us a very sad story that the Gemara in Brachos Nafchav Tesamanav tells us that there was a Kohen Gadol. His name was Yochanan Kohen Gadol, and for 80 years he served as a Kohen Gadol. He was a tzaddik. Apparently, he was the same Kohen Gadol who instituted the halachas of demai, which is that that certain people weren't considered trustworthy in terms of separating certain tithes, and he instituted that there should be a system of re-separation of tithes just in case these people had not separated their tithes. So he was a great man. He was a tzaddik, a Talmid Chacham, and he served as the Kohen Gadol for 80 years. Imagine, the Kohen Gadol for 80 years. And at the end of his life, he became a tzeduki. He became a person who was a Reformed Jew who intended to corrupt the Torah instead of intending to follow the Torah. So a person should be careful. The Gemara tells us that there was a great Talmid Chacham. His name was Gemara in Chagiga in Daf Tezvav Tezayin. The Gemara tells us there was a great Talmid Chacham by the name of Rabbi Elisha ben Avuha. And this Rabbi Elisha ben Avuha was so great that one of his Talmidim, one of his disciples, was actually Rabbi Meir. And Rabbi Meir features throughout Mishnah. He's all over. The Gemara tells us that Stam Mishnah, Rabbi Meir. If you have a Mishnah, you're not sure who the author is, you could be certain that the author was Rabbi Meir. And this Rabbi Meir was a disciple of Rabbi Elisha ben Avuha. He was a colleague of Ben Azai, a colleague of Rabbi Akiva. And yet, Elisha ben Avuha went off the path of Torah. And he was known afterwards as Acher. Acher means change. Elisha ben Avuha is quoted in Pirkei Avos, but Acher, he's known as a person who has a stranger. He at one point he went into a brothel, and one of the women there said to him, "Aren't you Elisha ben Avuha?" He said, "No, Acher, I'm a stranger. I'm somebody else." And he went completely off the path of Torah. So nobody should ever say that I will never go off the path of Torah. I'm never going to sin. That is simply not true. A person should not ever believe that he is going to, should never be confident in himself until the very day that he dies. I think we're going to stop here, And Mitzvah will continue on this very theme, Al Taman Atzmacha Ad Yom Moscha, tomorrow. I'm sorry, next week. So I wish you a good Shabbos.